Just as a courtesy, please do not use any of these slides or the images they contain without written permission from me. Thank you very much. So in this part of my talk, I'm going to go over how to travel safely and as conveniently as possible in a variety of different transportation options that are not the family's own car, including planes, taxis, charter buses, city buses, trains, and subways. Let's start with airplanes. Across the world, it is not required to buy a plane ticket for a child under 2. Over the age of 2, kids are required to have their own seat, but they're still not required to sit in a car seat on the plane. The majority of parents have never seen a child use a car seat on a plane because it's unfortunately not commonly done. So what I want you guys to think about in this section is the next time you're meeting with a family, let's say they bring their 2 kids in their minivan and you put the seats in with them, think to ask them, do you have any trips coming up this summer or in the fall that you're taking a plane? And talk to them a little bit about how to travel safely with the kids rather than perhaps just focusing on the car that they brought with them. It's important to not only educate the parents about why they should buy a ticket for a child under 2 on the plane and why they should use car seats on the plane, but also to give them some tools to help them travel safely and conveniently, because things can be hard to navigate with children, especially when you're lugging around car seats. So the first topic is, why should a parent even buy a seat on a plane for a child under 2? This is likely the toughest hurdle, convincing the parent to spend several $100s that they don't frankly need to spend, and they likely don't even see a need to spend. Not only to buy the seat for the child, but then they also have to bring the car seat on board, as frankly the default for most parents is to choose to hold the child on their lap. I'm going to present you with 3 reasons why I think it is very important that kids have their own seat on the plane and use a car seat on board the plane when possible. So here's reason number 1. Frankly, kids deserve the same protection on a plane as adults get. And while a seatbelt obviously cannot restrain a small child, a car seat can. This point was sadly brought home a few years ago when there was a small plane that crashed with 9 people on board. There were 8 adults and 1 baby. All 8 adults not only survived, but they survived without major injury. The 6-month-old who was held on his mother's lap did not survive. It frankly did not have to be this way. Had the 6-month-old been in a car seat, he not only should have survived, he should have done better than everyone else. Reason number 2 is to keep the child safe in the car. So let's think about it. Since planes are statistically much safer than cars, I actually think that this is the biggest reason that it's important for a child to ride in a car seat on the plane. Specifically, making sure the child is safe in the car rides associated with the airplane trip, because no one walks to and from the airport. Parents who check their car seats may find that the airline lost the car seat, or in cases of connecting flights that the car seat does not arrive at the destination at the same time that the parent does, making it very hard to leave the airport safely with the child. Seats can also get broken when checked under the plane, so if parents do check it, they should be told to inspect the seat for damage when they get it back from baggage claim. If the child has a seat on the plane and the parents bring the car seat on board, then the car seat will be present and in good condition when they need to leave the airport. The other reason that I want parents bringing their own seat is that I don't want them renting seats. Rental car seats have a plethora of problems associated with them. Sometimes the parent shows up and just like they don't always have the car you wanted, sometimes they also don't have the car seat that you need. They might only have boosters left, but you brought an 8-month-old, or they might have no seats left at all. Even if they do have seats, sometimes the quality of them leaves a lot to be desired, and or the person who used it before you might have misrouted the straps or done something else that the parent will not notice and could affect the child's safety during a crash. So it's important that the parent bring their own seat that they hopefully know how to install properly. And reason number 3, if I haven't convinced you already, putting all of the safety aside and focusing just on your sanity, is that it's frankly like holding a flipper whale on your lap to try to hold a toddler. Imagine doing that for a long plane ride. The toddler is then also pulling the hair of the person in front of them and all these other unsundry things. Whereas if the child is in a car seat, they're strapped in, you know exactly where they are, and the behavior is typically much better. So you and the child can both have a nicer flight if they're restrained. Bringing a car seat on a plane can be difficult, but there are some car seats that are much more travel-friendly than others. And I think it's helpful to share with parents some tricks about which seats might be easiest to bring and how to bring them along if we're expecting people to do what we're saying. But before we talk about travel-friendly car seats, it's important to mention which products are not FAA approved. So it's important to also understand that the FAA only has jurisdiction over certain time periods, specifically taxiing, takeoff, landing, and turbulence. So you could sell any product, and as long as you say that it's only allowed to be used once you've reached the cruising altitude and there's no turbulence, you could sell whatever you want. You could hang the baby upside down. The FAA can't control that. So these two products, the Baby Air and the Fly Baby, are both in the jurisdiction where they cannot be used on taxi, takeoff, landing, or turbulence. They are not FAA approved. The Baby Air is a belt that connects the baby to your lap belt. As you saw from that beginning crash test, that could cause the child to be crushed between the adult's chest and the adult's thighs. And this Fly Baby is this weird hammock that connects into the adult's lap belt, as well as the hook that controls the tray table. Other products that are not FAA approved, but these are obviously seats that the parent might have for other reasons because they're typically child restraints they're using in their vehicle. For example, some rear-facing only seat bases are not approved for use on the plane, whereas the carrier by itself is. So if the parent is bringing the base along, make sure they know to put it in the overhead bin. Car beds for premature infants are not FAA approved. Boosters, because they obviously require shoulder belts, and there's no shoulder belts on planes, are not allowed. And harness systems that require tethers. We'll be talking about the IMI Go car seat later on in our talk. That would be one example that requires a tether and cannot be used on a plane as a result. So how is a parent to know if their child restraint can be used on board? If it can be, it will have this exact text in red type on a sticker somewhere on the car seat. And yes, you might have to flip the car seat upside down to find it. It will say, "This restraint is certified for use in motor vehicles and aircraft." This is the FAA sticker should someone ask for it. And it's typically also located somewhere in the instruction manual. So let's talk about travel-friendly child restraints. Because if you're talking with a family and encouraging them to buy a seat and bring a car seat on board, helping them navigate how to get this large hunk of plastic along with their often uncooperative young child with them through the airport and onto the plane can be helpful in making their trip as smooth as possible. For infants and young toddlers, a high weight and height capacity rear-facing only seat is going to be the most convenient, particularly because the parent most likely has a stroller that the seat will snap into, which makes getting through the airport with the car seat quite easy. When it comes to installing a rear-facing only seat on a plane, extremely simple. First, remind the parent that it always goes rear-facing. Sometimes they get a little confused about this. Just simply route the lap belt up over the baby's lap through the lap belt guides, buckle it in, give a quick pull, and you're done. The one thing is, older babies might quickly figure out that you can open the airplane seatbelt by lifting up the flap. If this happens, or as a preemptive strike, the parent can buckle it in so that the lap belt will open downwards rather than opening upwards. And this will typically prevent the child from figuring out how to unbuckle the airplane seatbelt. When we talk about convertibles, these are typically much harder to schlep along as they're much bigger and bulkier. But here are some ideas. The first thing would be is to suggest that the parent bring their own car seat, the one that they're using in their own vehicle, on the plane with them. There are currently several options for rolling carts to allow you to get this convertible or combination seat through the airport without having to carry it. And these carts will typically fit in the overhead bin of the plane. Here are just 3 examples. Having tried different ones and gotten feedback from parents, they tend to really like this Go-Go Kids one, the original Travel Mate. Whatever the parent wants to use is obviously the right choice for them. The Go-Go Kids just seems to be the most durable, and the one with the rollerblade wheels seems to be a nice smooth pull. In these scenarios, as you can see in the picture, the child can be in the car seat while the parent is wheeling the car seat through the airport, because they might have checked their stroller right when they arrived to the airport in this scenario. So having the child be able to be strapped in as they're pulling them can make things much more helpful. Some parents will choose to keep the stroller with them until the gate, using the stroller as a glorified luggage cart for all of their extra stuff that they need to get through the airport. Here's another way to get a convertible seat through the airport is to use ratchet straps. This strap is actually made by Go-Go Babies, and it's about $20, but parents can make their own very easily. Buying ratchet straps from Home Depot, just pass it through the forward-facing belt path, and you can get the car seat connected to the rolling luggage. If you're making your own homemade version, I would not have the child sitting in the car seat while you're putting it on the rolling luggage. but with this one by GoGo Babies, they do allow the child to be buckled into the car seat at the same time. Other families might opt to buy a separate seat to use for travel. Some families opt for a very lightweight convertible seat like a Sonera Next that they might be able to just hook onto the handlebar of their stroller or carry more easily. When families are selecting lightweight seats, make sure that they also think narrow, as for example, the Apt 50 and the Sonera Next are both very similar in price point, around 40 to 50 bucks. However, the Apt 50 is several inches wider, even though it's similarly light in weight. And because it's so wide, it might not actually fit on some of the airplane seats. That would be a nasty surprise for a parent. Most of you are likely familiar with the folding feature of the Diono Radians, along with the Rainier, Pacifica, and Olympia. And you can buy from Diono a strap that allows you to wear the Radian or any of their seats like a backpack. However, it is important to mention to parents that the seat does weigh in the high 20s in pounds, about 27 pounds, which will make it too heavy for many parents to really want to carry, especially when some parents might be trying to wear a child in an ergo or some other carrier to get them through the airport without the child running away from them. For families who might be traveling and taking taxis frequently in their destination, a convertible seat that fits onto an actual stroller, rather than the rolling carts that we've talked about in previous slides, will likely be the most practical solution that will allow them to not only take the car seat on the plane, but most importantly, also take the car seat in the taxis at their destination. So while a taxi ride to a hotel or to the airport doesn't really require the car seat to fit onto an actual stroller, taking taxis around a city does really require the seat to fit on a stroller in order to make it practical to take along. As imagine you visit New York City and you're walking around and going in and out of taxis, you're not really going to have a convertible car seat strapped onto your back as you're walking through the city all day. So if the car seat fits onto an actual stroller, it can pass the reasonable man test to take the taxi safely and conveniently. There are two convertible seats that fit onto strollers. The Orbit toddler seat, which fits on the Orbit stroller, is one option. It is quite expensive. The seat and stroller combination together will be over $1,000, and the car seat is quite heavy, so logistically not always the easiest travel option. The Combi Coccoro, which is about $200, is quite small and compact. It weighs just 11 pounds, and it fits nicely even in small airplane seats and tiny vehicles. It also fits on the Mountain Buggy Nano stroller. The drawbacks to the Coccoro are that it is expensive at about $200. It also has a shorter rear-facing capacity than average, so the fact that it's compact is great for small cars and small planes and not great for keeping big kids rear-facing. Most kids will be too tall for it rear-facing around age 2. It also has a very limited forward-facing capacity because the top shoulder strap slot is quite low. I do know that some people have also put the Costco Sonera Next onto the same Mountain Buggy Nano stroller. I personally have not tried it, so I can't say whether I'd recommend doing this or not. While we're talking about the Mountain Buggy Nano stroller, it's a good time to mention a fun tidbit on flying internationally that most parents find out the hard way. And it's something that if you share this with the parent, you might be able to make their trip much nicer. Here's what I mean. When you gate check a stroller on an international flight, it is not usually waiting at the gate for you. Rather, you have to walk to the other end of the airport. Now, mind you, you're schlepping your kid and the diaper bag and their car seat and everything else you had on the plane. You have to then go through customs and then stand at the baggage carousel until your stroller arrives. Imagine doing this after a really long international flight with your kids screaming. Super not fun. So the Nano is one of a few strollers that will take a car seat and are compact enough to fit in the overhead bin of a plane. The Nano will accommodate the widest variety of car seats of the strollers that do fit in the overhead bin. You can see the others listed here, the Baby Zen Yo-Yo, the GB Cubit, and the GB Pocket. The Pocket does not take any car seats. The ImiGo is another interesting travel-friendly seat, but there are some pros and cons that I want to talk about with it. In this picture here, you can see the ImiGo strapped on, just really hanging from the handlebars of an umbrella stroller. The ImiGo is a combination seat. It's a forward-facing 5-point harness for kids up to 55 pounds if you install it with latch, which is how it likes to be installed. And you can typically get kids till 6 to 7 harnessed in it. It then turns into a backless booster. So the ImiGo, on the one hand, is great for travel. It weighs just 10 pounds. It's easy to transport. It frankly is like you're just carrying a big briefcase. And you can see it can hook onto the handlebars of strollers like you see in the picture, and it also offers a very quick and easy latch installation. On the other hand, it cannot be used on the plane since planes do not have tether anchors, and this car seat requires a tether at all times. However, it should be noted that it does fit nicely in the overhead bin of the plane, so you don't have to check it and risk it getting lost or damaged. For forward-facing kids who are mature enough to sit in the airplane seat and behave themselves, this is a great travel-friendly seat. Many 2- and 3-year-olds, however, benefit tremendously from being strapped into a car seat on the plane, as their behavior is so much better that way. So that's up to the parent to decide whether this would be an ideal option for their child. When we talk about the CARES harness in a few slides, that would be an option to give the child a little extra upper body protection on a plane if the parent is choosing to use the GO as their restraint for in the cars. When talking about which car seats to bring on the plane, a lot of parents will ask about measuring the car seat to make sure it fits on the plane. For any of you who have tried to do 3 across in vehicles, you might know that measuring car seats is not actually that useful, because it often is not the total width of the car seat that matters, but the total width at a very specific point in the car seat that actually is going to matter. So for example, on a plane, let's say the car seat's 19 inches wide, but it may only be 16 inches wide at the point where it's going to need to be the narrowest. Typically, that's going to be where the airplane armrests are located. And if it's wider up at the head area, that's fine. Yes, it might eat into some of your room for your shoulders, but the car seat will still fit on the plane. Whereas if that car seat was 19 inches wide at the point where it meets the airplane armrests, you might not actually be able to even physically fit it in there. So it's pretty hard to measure the car seats, which it does introduce uncertainty for the parent as to whether their seat might or might not fit. But looking for seats that taper towards the armrest area would be helpful. It also is helpful to know if the airplane seat has armrests that move up and down. I've looked on seatguru.com, and unfortunately this is not something that they list. However, if you look in the comment section for that specific plane, sometimes people have commented on whether the armrests do move up or down. This is not just an issue for car seats, but a lot of heavier adults also want to find airplane seats where the armrests move up and down. One thing also to talk about with parents who are bringing a convertible seat on board for a child is which direction to face the car seat. So if the child is within the parameters for forward facing, it would still be better if the child meets the rear facing parameters to use it rear facing. Rear facing is safer on a plane, it's safer in a car. However, there are times on a plane where the parent is going to need to put it forward facing. Sometimes the airplane seat does not have enough depth to physically fit the rear facing seat, even with the person in front keeping their seat fully upright. And other times the flight attendants, and we'll get into this in a little bit, might tell you or insist that you put it forward facing. And I don't think it's worth getting kicked off the plane for if the child is within the parameters for forward facing of the convertible seat. But that's a decision the parents can make on their own. So boosters cannot be used on a plane since planes don't have shoulder belts. But it's a really good idea for the parent to bring the booster on the plane so that in case the booster gets lost or damaged under the plane, like can happen if they check it, they have completely eliminated that as an option. They will always have the booster in a safe condition and with them at their arrival if they bring it in, put it in the overhead bin. So here are some ideas about boosters that are ideal for travel. In terms of backless boosters, the Bubble Bum, it weighs a pound, it's inflatable, it deflates. While you can't use it on the plane, it can often work as a nice head pillow to use if you're leaning against the window on the plane. The Incognito is great for the bigger kids to bring along. And a lot of you might remember this as the Compass B500, the folding high back booster. Baby Trend recently bought all the patents from these seats from the first years and is now rebranding them with just minor design modifications. So this is a booster that's allowed for 30 to 100 pounds. Obviously, as we all know, we'd like to see kids be at least 40 pounds and obviously of a sufficient age and maturity to sit properly in it. But that's an option, and the manufacturer states that it should fit in the overhead bin in the folded state. Let's talk about the CARES harness. So the CARES harness is an FAA-approved product that provides upper body restraint for a child. There is a loop that secures over the airplane seat and then the lap belt gets threaded through belt guides on the CARES harness. There are some instances where the CARES harness sometimes interferes with the tray table of the person in the seat behind the child. That might be an issue that you'll have to deal with or counsel the parents about. In my opinion, this product has somewhat limited use in that it's really only ideal for parents who are going to be going to a destination where they have a car seat that's waiting for them, that they know the history of, they know how to install it. Hopefully it might even already be installed properly for them, but so that it's ready for when they arrive. In that the CARES is only approved for use on planes. It is not safe for cars. So in instances where parents are using this on the plane and they're traveling to some random location and then planning to rent a car seat from a rental agency, I would rather see them bring their own car seat on the plane and use that own car seat in the rental agency vehicle rather than borrowing someone else's random car seat. But in terms of providing upper body restraint on a plane, the CARES harness does a nice job. The one thing to know when thinking about using it for a young child is that there is no crotch strap to this product. So some children very quickly realize that they can just simply wiggle and slide right out from under it. Whereas in a car seat, this 2-year-old who figured out how to slide out of the CARES harness would not be able to slide out of their own car seat because there's a crotch buckle. So just something to keep in mind as far as the practicality for the youngest riders. It is approved for kids 22 to 44 pounds and up to 40 inches. With the FAA permit, however, it can be used for kids 41 to 56 inches. So for kids who have some special behavioral needs or have a little bit of low tone that need a little extra support on a plane seat, this can offer something that's not a full car seat that might be unwieldy to bring along for these really big kids. There is also a special CARES that I'm modeling in this picture that with the FAA permit can be used for passengers over 60 inches. I was modeling it at a booth of a conference, not on an actual plane. There's a lot of things parents need to know when booking a plane ticket for a child. So let's go through some of the key things. The first, they need to know to buy a window seat. The child's car seat is not allowed to block an adult's exit to the aisle, so it's typically necessary to buy the child a window seat. The only exception would be on international flights where there's a middle section of the plane. The child is allowed to go in the middle of the middle section because the adults can get to the aisle from either end. Next thing to talk about is when traveling with a rear-facing car seat, parents often know that the car seat may have trouble fitting in the very shallow seats often found in coach these days. Some parents choose to buy the extended legroom seats in coach to try to circumvent this problem. However, the parent needs to make sure to read the fine print on the extended legroom seats and check that they are not in an exit row or the row just in front of or behind the exit row, as sometimes these are not allowed. Sometimes these seats you are not allowed to install a car seat on. Obviously, everyone knows you can't put it in the exit row, but the rows before and in front of are also sometimes not allowed for car seats as well. So read the fine print before you buy the ticket. Whether the center armrest moves up and down or whether it's fixed can make a huge difference between fitting a car seat physically, literally onto the airplane seat, or not. The area between the armrests is where the car seat needs to be the skinniest to stand the best chance of fitting. If traveling with 2 kids, both in car seats, try and book rows back to back. This way, if the forward-facing child kicks the seat in front of them, they're kicking one of your seats, maybe their own sibling seat, and not a stranger's seat. One parent gave me this suggestion that worked well for her, so I'm going to share it with you to try to keep older kids from kicking the back of the seat in front of them. She took a large picture of her family and taped it to the back of the seat in front. And she said to the child, this is our family, we don't kick our family. And she said for her it worked to keep the child's feet for the most part off the seat in front of them. When families are traveling internationally, there's a little bit more that they need to know. They need to be very careful if they're flying a non-US based carrier to check what the rules of that carrier are with regards to car seats. There's 3 categories of what is allowed. Some international carriers allow all car seats. Some, as listed on the right here, only allow forward-facing car seats, and they only allow them for kids 6 months to 3 years. And then the other category allow no car seats. So if the parent is hoping to bring the child's car seat on board, knowing what the airline's policies are very important. Imagine if a parent tries to bring their rear-facing only seat for their 7-month-old onto Aer Lingus. They might have spent $1,000 for that ticket to Ireland only to find out that they cannot use the car seat on board and are likely going to be pretty unhappy about that. So talking to parents that if they fly outside of the US on a US-based carrier, the FAA rules will apply and they are then allowed to use a car seat so long as it has the FAA approval sticker. But if they fly a non-US based carrier out of the US, they need to look very carefully before they buy the tickets to make sure the airline not only allows car seats, but allows them for the direction and the age that matches for their child. The other thing, which I don't know if any of you have seen before, but there are more and more airplanes coming out with airbags in the lap belts. It's more often a problem in first class or business class, but JetBlue has them in some of their planes, even in coach. The seatbelt airbags come in several different varieties. Some of them cannot be deactivated and are not permitted to be used with a child's car seat. Some of them can be deactivated. There's an extender piece that's used. It looks something like a seatbelt extender that when used will deactivate the airbag. Here's the problem with these airbag seatbelts. Number one, most parents don't know about it ahead of time, and so they get on the plane and are now surprised to find this. So if a parent is flying business or first, this would be something they would want to call the airline and see about before going onto the plane. In a situation like you can see here, the airbag seatbelt is so bulky that you can't even fit the seatbelt under the lap belt guides. So the parent is now faced with a decision tree with three options. Option number one, because clearly they're already on the plane and this is the only car seat they have. So option number one is to use the car seat knowing that the seat is not being held in properly because the seatbelt can't even go under the lap belt guides. That would be option number one. Option number two would be to check the car seat under the plane and not use a car seat at all for the child. Clearly not a good solution either. And option number three would be to give up their first class ticket or business class ticket and move back to coach where there might not be airbags in the seatbelts. Also, not as easy said as done. So these are the things that if the parent knows about ahead of time, they might be able to perhaps choose a different flight that maybe there were similar flight times and one of them was using a plane that did or didn't have these airbags in the seatbelt, or choose a different class option. Maybe the extended leg room in coach would be a tolerable solution instead of flying business or whatever it might be. So this is something I think we're going to start seeing on more and more planes, and we'll have to see how the FAA deals with this with car seats as this becomes more common. When it comes to installing a car seat on the plane, there are some important tips to pass along to parents. First, just telling them to recline the back of the airplane seat when installing the car seat, and then when trying to get their hand in to uninstall the car seat, will make life a lot easier in situations where they've put a forward-facing car seat on the plane. Obviously, you do have to sit the seat back upright when you're done, as the flight attendant will remind you if you've forgotten, which would be towards the front of the airplane, but now there's a wall of plastic between that buckle and the front of the plane. So the trick is, before parents buckle the seatbelt, they need to flip the buckle a half a turn so that it will release towards the back of the plane, which is towards the open part of the belt path, so that at the end of the flight they can open the seatbelt. If the parent forgets to do this and they get the seatbelt stuck, it's not permanently stuck, but they do make the parent wait until everyone gets off the plane, and then the stewardess comes with some special tool and they pop the seatbelt out of the airplane seat completely and the seat gets released. The other thing some people ask for is a seatbelt extender. That can put an additional, obviously you'll have two releases now if you use a seatbelt extender. You can often have one of them situated so that it's on the side of the car seat rather than in the belt path behind the child's back. The one thing about asking for a seatbelt extender is that it does call attention to the fact that you're using a car seat, and sometimes you don't really want to bring attention to that fact because the flight attendants, as we're going to talk about soon, are not always the most well-informed. So I would just try this trick rather than asking for the belt extender whenever possible. The one time when you do need a belt extender is a rear-facing Nano. Those have a fully closed belt path such that if you buckle it in whatever way, flipping the buckle or buckling it in normally, when the buckle is stuck in the rear-facing belt path, you cannot get it unbuckled. So on Nano's rear-facing, you need to ask for a seatbelt extender and put one of the releases on the side of the belt path, not in the belt path that's under the child's legs. So I have this infographic up on our website, and I just want to go through it. It kind of summarizes some of the things we've talked about, and also is good for parents to help them know what their rights are. So if all of the following 4 conditions are met: number 1, the parent has purchased a ticket for the child; number 2, the flight is inside the U.S. and it can be on any airline, or if outside the U.S., it's on a U.S.-based airline, because in all these situations, the FAA has jurisdiction, and the child's car seat is FAA approved, and the child is within the weight and height range for the car seat, then the following applies. The child, and this is per the FAA guidelines, number 1, the child may and should use the car seat during the entire flight. Number 2, the child may and should ride rear-facing if the child is within the car seat's weight and height limits for rear-facing. We do find that flight attendants often give people a lot of trouble when they see kids rear-facing in car seats, which is extremely bizarre since the flight attendants are the ones who also ride rear-facing on the plane. And number 3, if a child's car seat does not fit in the given airplane seat, the FAA says that the airline must make reasonable accommodations to move the family to a different seat. In the real world, does this happen? Not always. And no, they do not have to put you on first class if your coach seat does not fit your car seat. But if there was a different coach seat where it might fit, they're supposed to try to move you around. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about misinformed flight attendants, because it is important for parents to know what they might encounter. The flight attendants, in my experience, tend to be a pretty woefully misinformed group about car seats. I mean, frankly, you and I all know that the misuse rate for car seats in the general population is somewhere greater than 90%, and flight attendants are part of the general population. They haven't received any special training in car seats, despite the fact that we would want them to have received special training. And so the advice that they offer to parents is sometimes just wrong. They might tell parents who have bought a seat and are using an FAA-approved car seat that the parent cannot use the seat at all, that they have to check it under the plane. They might tell them that they have to put forward-facing or rear-facing only seat. Or bizarrely, they might tell the parent that they have to take the child out of the car seat and hold the child during takeoff, landing, and turbulence. This always strikes me as odd, but I get a lot of stories from parents that this happens quite often. So what is a parent to do? This is going to sound as like really strange advice, but I can tell you, having heard a lot of stories from parents, I think this is the best plan of attack. If the flight attendant tells the parent that something that's wrong, but the parent thinks that they can do it while the flight attendant is watching, and then can undo it when the flight attendant leaves to buckle up for takeoff, the parent will at least stay on the flight. I have heard of numerous examples where the parent was correct, the flight attendant was wrong, but the parent engaged with the flight attendant on it, and the flight attendant kicked the parent off, even though the parent was right and the flight attendant was wrong. Getting kicked off a flight is not a lot of fun. So if the parent thinks they can do whatever they're being told, even though it's wrong, while they're being watched, and then undo it when they leave to buckle up for takeoff, they'll at least hopefully stay on the flight. In most cases, the flight attendant is not going to tell the pilot to force land the plane in Nebraska or something because you turned your seat a direction they didn't want you to once you're already in flight. But before you've taken off, they have a lot of control over the situation. On our website, there are several documents from the FAA that tell on FAA letterhead what to say back to the flight attendant if they tell you something wrong. But engaging with flight attendants tends to go quite poorly, so we strongly advise that parents keep their engagement to a minimum, be as respectful as possible to hopefully have a happy and safe flight. And if the flight attendant gives a parent problem about having a child rear-facing, it might be helpful to just gently remind the flight attendant that they might be sitting rear-facing and that it's not coincidence. They sit rear-facing because it's safer for them. So we're going to move on now. I think we've covered a lot about airplanes, and we're going to move on to taxis. So let's talk about urban travel needs, because typically parents are taking taxis in an urban situation. Sometimes they might not own their own car. Sometimes they do, but they don't want to deal with the hassles of parking. Sometimes they just want the convenience that it offers. So when we think about urban environments, there's often public transportation options available as well, but what might make a parent choose a taxi instead of a subway or a public bus? So one option is that taxis offer door-to-door service that's always available 24/7, yet subway and bus in most locations is not a 24/7 service. Subways also might not run in the middle of the night. They might have limited service on weekends, especially in outer boroughs or places farther away from the center of the city. While the subway stations may have elevators, or if you live in New York City, I can tell you that most do not actually, but even those that do, often the elevator is broken, or you can't find it, or other problems, making it hard to navigate with a child in a stroller. And buses often make you fold the stroller and then hold the child, which, if you imagine having gone grocery shopping, you have the stroller loaded up with the groceries and the kid finally fell asleep. Then you get onto the bus and you have to somehow hold the child and the groceries in the stroller. This can be extremely difficult to navigate as one adult and a young child. And sometimes you just want a little more privacy than public transportation allows. Like if your kid is having a major meltdown, sometimes you don't want to be on the subway with your 2-year-old screaming and kicking, and you just want to get home and be in the privacy of your own home to deal with it. While taking a taxi is easy and convenient for adults to do, albeit not often cheap, taking children safely and conveniently in a taxi can actually be quite difficult. And people often compromise safety in favor of convenience. In an urban environment, taxi travel is very different than taking a taxi from point A to point B, like you might do, let's say, to go to the airport on vacation. In an urban environment, people are typically walking around in between, and they're going to places like the grocery store or other places where there's not going to be a location to store the child's car seat while you're in that location. Let's talk about which car seats do and don't pass the reasonable man test for taking in a taxi in an urban environment. Those that do pass the reasonable man test are rear-facing only seats. They fit onto a stroller frame. Most people have them. They're available in all price points. If you have a family who's looking to use a lot of taxis, it'd be helpful to guide them to select a rear-facing only seat that has a high height and weight capacity, because they'll get the longest use out of it. But then you have a large gap between when the child outgrows that rear-facing only seat to when they're finally ready for a booster, which is the next convenient way to take a kid in a taxi. Booster seats like the Bubble Bum or the Ride Safer travel vest, which functions like a booster in terms of being a seatbelt positioning device. Both of those weigh about a pound. They're quite easy to put in your diaper bag or put in a child-sized backpack and take with you. The seats that do not really pass the reasonable man test for taking around in taxis in an urban environment, those are convertible and combination seats. You're not going to drag your kid behind you on a rolling cart like this Go-Go Babies or whatever one it is. And you're not going to wear your car seat as a backpack, as this woman is doing, as you walk around New York City or you go around Baltimore or whatever city you might be in. These are just not practical. The problem is when people then choose to take these toddlers in taxis, they put a little bit of blinders on and they forget that taxis actually do get into crashes. This was an example on 6th Avenue in Manhattan. And there also tends to be a disconnect between what people want versus what people often do. It's important to keep in mind that due to powerful lobbying by the taxi industry, most state laws exempt taxis from child passenger safety laws. And since it's legal in most states to hold your child on your lap in a taxi, the vast majority of parents who take their young kids in taxis do so without a car seat. As we were saying, infant seats are very portable and very frequently used in taxis. Although as someone who lives in New York City, I can tell you that a lot of people bring the car seat into the taxi, but don't actually buckle the rear-facing only seat in a taxi. Don't quite understand it. They've gone like 90% of the way there, but they don't buckle it in. Happens often enough that I just don't understand it. But there's nothing when you get into this toddler stage, the convertible and combination seat stage, that really offers the same level of portability. We did talk about the Combi Coccoro back in the airplane section that can fit onto the Mountain Buggy Nano. But other than that, which is obviously a seat that's out of a lot of people's price point, there's nothing that offers the same level of convenience that an infant seat does. And unfortunately, many parents decide to make a decision that we all would rather them not make, which is to choose convenience over safety, and they choose to hold the child on their lap, as you can see this mom doing here. So as we talked about, this is somewhat of a repeat from the airplanes, but let's focus specifically on taxis. Guiding parents with young children to pick high-weight rear-facing only seats will give them the longest time taking kids conveniently and safely in taxis. When talking with parents about the rear-facing only seat, if they can, choose a seat with a European belt path. The least expensive one on the market is the Urbini pedal, sold at Walmart for well under $100. Even as a travel system, it's only about $100. The European belt path not only offers a more secure installation, it also helps the parent remember to use the switchable retractor, which in rushed environments like a taxi where you don't have the luxury of a lot of time, and if the parent forgets, the installation won't be as secure. So the European kind of forces you into that. And the shoulder belt around the back of the seat also decreases forces on the child's head and neck by the way that it controls the movement of the car seat during a crash. But either way, I'm just happy to see the parent using a car seat in a taxi. We had talked about the Combi Coccoro as a convertible seat that offers a seat that will fit onto a stroller frame for a bigger child who's outgrown the rear-facing only seat. On the left, you can see it being used for a toddler in a taxi in New York. On the right, you can see it being used as the parent is waiting for the taxi. It fits onto the Baby Trend Snap and Go, which costs about $60, and the Mountain Buggy Nano, which is about $200. The Nano is a more versatile stroller in that it can also be used for children without the car seat attached, but it is a more expensive stroller. Before we move on to boosters, I do want to talk a little bit more about what to offer families who are living in urban environments and might be of somewhat limited means as far as taking the child in a car seat into a taxi. Obviously, any car seat can go into a taxi, but as we've discussed, some are more practical than others. The Sonera Next is the least expensive of convertible seats, perhaps even on the market. There are some close competitors. It is lightweight. The latch straps are a little harder to use, and if a parent got push-on connectors, it would be important to teach the parent either the seatbelt and the latch installation, obviously never to be used at the same time, but so that they have two different options. Sometimes finding the seatbelt buckles in taxis can be hard, and sometimes finding the latch anchors can be hard. So knowing both ways. The car seat is light enough that they might be able to loosen the child's harness straps all the way and hook them onto the handlebars of an umbrella stroller as they're carting it around the city. The IMI Go, if the parent has the funds to afford a $200 seat, for someone who's taking taxis and going in and out of different cars, that would offer a quick installation in a seat that, if they had a large stroller, the IMI Go is small enough it can even fit in the basket of a large stroller, or as you saw in earlier sections, it can hang on the handlebars of an umbrella stroller. But again, none of these are quite as practical as the parent was used to when the child was in the infant seat, and they're also not as practical as when the child is big enough to use a booster seat. As far as booster seats that are on the market that are travel friendly, right now the Bubble Bum I think takes the cake. There is another one coming out soon that is hopefully going to be quite travel friendly. For those of you who are aware of the Safety First Booster Pack, it is unfortunately no longer in the US market. The Ride Safer Travel Vest is something that is often misunderstood by parents. This is a booster seat in terms of it is a positioning device for the seatbelt. This is not a 5-point harness car seat. So it's important to understand the differences. It comes in two different sizes. One of them does offer the option of a crotch strap. I would suggest using that. I find that it helps to keep the lap belt fit optimized or better optimized for the child. As with any booster, it's important that the child not slouch. With this product, because the child is sitting directly on the vehicle seat and their legs stick straight out, in my experience, I think kids tend to slouch a little bit more in this than they might in a booster seat. However, in situations where they're in a taxi, there is often a parent in the back seat with the child who might be able to offer some behavioral control support, should we say, to encourage the child to sit upright and not slouch. This is also an expensive option. It costs about $100. The Bubble Bum is $30. So I think the practicality is that the Bubble Bum is more realistic for people to be taking along, and it fits in more people's price points. When talking about city buses, you obviously cannot use a car seat there, as there is no seatbelts on buses. But city buses are quite safe in terms of forms of transportation because they're so big it's hard to miss them. If they do get hit, unless they're hit by another city bus, the mass of the bus is, no pun intended, much more massive and is able to absorb much of the energy of the crash so that less of the energy gets transferred to the occupants in the bus. So unless your bus gets into a crash with another bus, you'll likely do pretty well. The most likely cause of injury in a city bus is actually going to be if you're standing. So recommending that people sit, especially when with children, but even without, will decrease your risk of injury. So the only time that I would suggest wearing a child in a moving vehicle would be on a city bus that doesn't offer seatbelts. You can see me wearing my friend's baby there, and her 3-year-old is sitting on my lap. It was a packed city bus in New York, and so keeping everyone seated, if there was somewhat of a situation where the bus had to stop short, you'll be less likely to fall than you would be if you were standing up. For coach and charter buses, most of them do not offer seatbelts. However, Greyhound, which also owns Bolt Bus, has outfitted all of their vehicles. They said that by the end of 15, which we've obviously passed now, all of their buses will have seatbelts. I haven't verified that, but they had been putting it on. IMI was actually the supplier of the seatbelts, and there were actually also latch anchors going in. So this is something that if the bus does have seatbelts, then the parent should be encouraged to use the seatbelt and to secure the child's car seat if they brought it. If, however, the bus does not have seatbelts, then you cannot use a car seat because there's nothing to secure it. This is just showing the lap and shoulder belt on the bus and the latch anchors. This was on a Bolt bus. And as far as the train and the subway, the thing that's important is to make sure the parent has walked through what's going to happen when they get picked up by a family member or take an Uber going from the train station to wherever their final destination is. Making sure they're bringing a car seat with them is going to be important.